The cabin of Flight 447 had that tense hush passengers know too well, the kind that drops when something feels wrong. A white woman in her 50s stood rigidly in the aisle, her arm outstretched, finger leveled at a little girl no older than 9. "This child doesn't belong here," she declared, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Children like her don't fly first class. Remove her. Now." Every head turned. A few passengers lowered their phones from their laps, then raised them again, recording. Some gasped quietly, others stayed frozen in their seats, unsure of how to respond. The girl, Zara Montgomery, sat in seat 2A with her stuffed elephant cradled in her lap. Her eyes darted around the cabin, bewildered, fighting back tears. She wasn't disturbing anyone, wasn't loud, wasn't doing anything but waiting for takeoff. Yet the woman towering over her spat venom with every word, as if her very presence were an offense. "You see her?" The woman continued, her face twisting with indignation. "She's clearly in the wrong section. This is first class. This isn't for people like her." The flight attendant rushed forward, trying to mediate, but the damage was already done. Murmurs spread across the rows. A man in a business suit shifted uncomfortably in his seat, whispering to his companion. A mother clutched her toddler tighter, shielding him from the commotion. And still, the accusations grew louder. "I don't feel safe with her here. Who knows what background she comes from? Call security." A uniformed officer, alerted by the crew, appeared in the doorway of the aircraft. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop as his presence confirmed that this confrontation was no longer just words. It was about to become an official incident. Passengers held their breath. Phones tilted upward to capture the unfolding clash. A 9-year-old black girl sat trembling, while a woman twice her age and 4 times her size screamed for her removal from a seat she had every right to occupy. Before I take you further, a quick pause. If you believe dignity should never be questioned because of skin color, hit like and subscribe to join this channel. And in the comments, let us know which country you're watching from. We love seeing our stories reach people across the world. The officer took a step closer, his hand hovering over his radio. The flight attendant tried again, pointing at Zara's boarding pass, but the woman slapped her hand against the seatback for emphasis. "This is fraud," she shouted. "Her family can't afford this. Do your job and remove her before we take off." The little girl's lips trembled. She clutched the stuffed elephant tighter, whispering softly, "This is my seat. My mommy bought it." The officer crouched slightly, eyeing the ticket stub she held out with shaky fingers. Passengers craned their necks to catch his reaction. His brow furrowed, but before he could speak, the woman leaned in, jabbing her finger toward the child again. "She's lying. People like her don't sit here. Get her out." The tension in the cabin grew heavier with every word. People shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent, unsure if stepping in might escalate things further. Some stared at the officer, willing him to act. Others stared at the girl, shocked at the cruelty being directed at someone so small. Zara wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, her voice faint but clear. "I didn't do anything wrong." The woman's response was a sneer. "You don't belong in this space, and everyone here knows it." The cabin erupted in whispers, some condemning her words, others too stunned to speak. The officer straightened, his hand tightening on the radio. Crew members looked at each other nervously, waiting for direction. Zara's small frame seemed even smaller against the leather of the wide first-class seat. Her eyes shimmered, not with guilt, but with confusion at why she was suddenly treated as a criminal when she had only boarded the plane like everyone else. And the woman standing over her, smug and self-assured, believed she was untouchable. She thought her words would carry authority, that her accusations would be accepted as fact. But what she didn't know, what no one in that cabin yet realized, was that her target was not just any little girl. The woman had just ignited a chain of events that would strip her of everything she clung to. Because Vivian Ashworth had no idea who Zara Montgomery really was. And in less than 5 minutes, the woman's entire world would begin to collapse. The day had begun in a mansion tucked away in one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. The sunlight broke through tall glass windows, spilling over a marble dining table where 9-year-old Zara Montgomery sat swinging her legs. A plate of pancakes, drizzled with syrup, rested in front of her. Her stuffed elephant, Sky, sat propped on the chair beside her like an honored guest. Across the table sat her mother, Victoria Montgomery. Elegant and composed, she scrolled through the glowing screen of a tablet, reviewing financial projections for her company. Every so often, she adjusted the sleeve of her navy silk blouse, her expression one of quiet control. To the world outside, she was the CEO of Montgomery Aviation, one of the most powerful women in corporate America. To Zara, she was just mommy. Though even at 9, Zara understood her mother carried weight that stretched far beyond their home. Zara cut another bite of pancake, chewed, then suddenly announced, "Mommy, I'm big enough now. I want to fly to Daddy's house by myself." The fork slipped from Victoria's hand, clattering softly against the porcelain plate. She looked across the table at her daughter, so earnest, so determined, and exhaled slowly. "Sweetheart, you know how I feel about that." "But you always tell me to be independent," Zara countered, her tone firm for someone so young. "You say I should try things on my own. Well, I want to prove I can." Victoria's eyes softened. This was not a demand from a spoiled child. It was a declaration from a little girl eager to stand taller in a world that often tried to make her smaller. Victoria set the tablet down, leaning forward. "You are strong, Zara. Stronger than you know. But flying alone isn't just about being brave. It's about being prepared for how people might treat you." Zara frowned. "Because I'm a kid?" Victoria hesitated. She reached across the table, taking Zara's small hand into her own. "Because you're a kid, yes, and because you're a little black girl. Not everyone sees you the way I do. Not everyone sees what you're capable of. Some people judge before they know anything about you." Zara tilted her head, confused. "But why would they do that if I'm not mean to them?" Victoria's heart ached. She wished she could bottle up Zara's innocence and keep it safe forever. Because some people carry ugly beliefs, beliefs that have nothing to do with you but with the color of your skin, and when that happens, you must remember, your worth doesn't come from their approval, it comes from within you and from the life we've built. The girl's shoulders straightened. "So if they're mean, I don't let them win?" "Exactly," Victoria said softly. "You hold your head high, even if they try to make you feel small." Zara's eyes lit up again with determination. "Then let me try. Please, Mommy, I want to show you I can handle it." Victoria leaned back, weighing the request. She thought about the security teams she could assign, the assistants who would gladly shadow Zara. But that wasn't the lesson she wanted her daughter to learn. She wanted Zara to navigate the world without always being shielded by her family's wealth. The real challenge was not in buying a ticket, but in confronting a society that still doubted children like her. After a long silence, Victoria nodded. "All right, but no special announcements. No one needs to know who you are. You travel as any other passenger would." Zara squealed with joy, hugging her stuffed elephant tight. "Thank you, Mommy." Victoria smiled faintly, but her mind stayed cautious. She had spent years keeping her daughter's identity private, even as the media speculated about her empire. She wanted Zara to have moments of normalcy. School days, birthday parties, even a simple airplane trip. But beneath that desire was a knot of worry she could never untangle. She reached for her coffee, her voice lowering as she spoke. "Zara, I need you to remember one thing. The world can be unfair, sometimes cruel. If someone questions you, don't argue. Show them you belong with quiet strength. That's how you'll always win." Zara nodded solemnly, as if accepting a mission. She didn't yet understand the weight behind her mother's warning, but she would soon. In that bright Chicago dining room, a child's dream of independence and a mother's fear for her safety collided in silence. Neither of them could know that within 24 hours, those fears would take shape at 30,000 feet. And while Zara believed this trip was just her chance to prove she was growing up, it would instead become a lesson the entire nation would witness. Across town, while Zara Montgomery's morning began with pancakes and quiet determination, Vivian Ashworth's day opened to the sour smell of desperation. Her cramped studio apartment barely caught the sunlight, its single window framed by blinds that hadn't been replaced in years. On the chipped kitchen counter sat stacks of unpaid bills, each one screaming the same truth: her life was collapsing. The largest envelope bore red letters stamped across its face: "Eviction notice." Vivian had shoved it aside days ago, but it glared at her now like an accusation she couldn't escape. At 52, she was drowning. Failed ventures littered her past. A boutique that closed within a year, an online store that never shipped orders on time, a string of consulting gigs that left her reputation stained. Credit cards had been her crutch, each swipe a temporary fix, until the debt swelled so high it consumed her. Yet when Vivian looked in the cracked bathroom mirror, she didn't see failure. She saw someone owed more than life had given her. She adjusted the collar of her knockoff designer blouse, muttering to herself, "People need to know their place in society. Some belong in luxury, some don't, and I refuse to be mistaken for one of them." Those words weren't fleeting thoughts. They were her foundation. Prejudice had burrowed deep, shaping how she viewed success, wealth, and who deserved either. In her mind, privilege belonged to people who looked like her. Anyone else enjoying the same comforts was stealing a seat at the table. Her phone buzzed with another email reminder. Payment overdue. Vivian silenced it, her chest tightening. She had one shot left to project an image of success, and she wasn't about to let truth spoil it. She pulled open her wallet and found the single card not yet maxed out. The credit line was thin, but just enough. With trembling fingers, she booked a first-class ticket to Los Angeles. A reckless purchase, but in her mind, absolutely necessary. It wasn't just a flight. It was her stage. In Los Angeles, she had a meeting with an old acquaintance, someone who might invest in her latest idea. Vivian knew that if she showed up looking desperate, no one would take her seriously. But if she arrived from the front of a first-class cabin, wearing the mask of affluence, maybe she could still bluff her way back into relevance. Her reflection stared back at her again, as she practiced a smile, the kind that screamed superiority. "They'll see me as important," she whispered. "That's how you stay ahead. Appearances matter more than reality." But beneath that brittle mask simmered resentment. Every time she passed someone with real success, families in luxury cars, executives with polished suits, her envy twisted into contempt. She didn't see them as examples to admire. She saw them as obstacles, people who should move aside so she could claim the life she thought was hers. Vivian zipped her counterfeit leather bag, slipping in a few documents she planned to wave around at her meeting, hoping no one would notice they were outdated proposals recycled from years ago. As she locked her apartment door, she didn't even glance back at the peeling paint and sagging ceiling. In her mind, those surroundings didn't define her. The ticket in her purse did. On the way to the airport, her thoughts looped in bitter mantras. The world's going soft, handing opportunities to people who never earned them, letting anyone into spaces they don't deserve. Her lips curled as she muttered, "It's all upside down. Some people don't belong where they're trying to sit. They need reminding." That single idea fueled her, steeled her, convinced her she was justified in whatever judgments she cast. She would never say the word racist to describe herself. She cloaked her bias in phrases like standards and order. But the truth was clear. Her worldview was built on exclusion. At O'Hare International, she stepped out of her rideshare with exaggerated grace, clutching her bag as if it were Prada instead of a knockoff. She strutted toward the first-class check-in line, ignoring the ache in her chest from knowing this ticket was bought with borrowed money. To her, it didn't matter that she was one payment away from financial ruin. What mattered was being seen in the right seat, the right section, next to the right kind of people. And in her mind, the wrong kind of people would never be welcome there. What Vivian Ashworth couldn't imagine, as she adjusted her fake pearls and rehearsed her smile, was that her next flight would expose those beliefs to an entire cabin. Her arrogance was about to collide with a little girl carrying nothing but a stuffed elephant and her right to sit where her ticket placed her. And when the two met, the mask Vivian had worked so hard to keep intact would begin to crack. O'Hare Airport buzzed with its usual chaos, rolling suitcases clattering across polished floors, flight announcements echoing overhead, and travelers weaving through lines with practiced impatience. At Gate B12, the line for Flight 447 was already forming, and in the middle of it stood Jennifer Walsh, the gate agent on duty. Jennifer had been with the airline for 8 years. To the casual observer, she was efficient, polite, professional. But regular travelers noticed something others missed. Her smile wasn't given freely. She reserved warmth for passengers who matched her idea of who belonged. For the rest, her friendliness evaporated into clipped tones and narrowed eyes. This became obvious when two little girls, Emma and Sophie, approached the counter. Both were blonde, their hair tied back with pink ribbons. Their small rolling suitcases rattled as they placed them beside the desk. They were unaccompanied minors, traveling to visit their grandmother in Los Angeles. Jennifer's face lit up instantly. She stepped out from behind the counter, crouching to their level. "Oh my goodness, look at you two? Flying all by yourselves today? That's so brave." Her voice turned syrupy sweet as she clapped her hands together. The girls giggled, nodding proudly. Jennifer rummaged through a drawer, pulling out coloring books, crayons, and a few extra snacks. "I want you to have these for the flight, and don't you worry, I'll make sure you get on board first so you can pick the best seats." Her enthusiasm carried into the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause for our special young travelers today, Emma and Sophie, flying solo all the way to Los Angeles." The gate area chuckled and clapped politely. Several passengers smiled warmly at the two girls, while Jennifer personally escorted them to a set of chairs near the front of the gate. She knelt beside them, asking about school, favorite subjects, even what treats their grandmother might have waiting. She checked on them twice more, offering juice boxes and fussing like a doting aunt. For 20 minutes, the two children basked in kindness. To them, it felt like an adventure. To the crowd, it was heartwarming. Then Zara Montgomery walked up. She was also 9, also an unaccompanied minor, also traveling with her paperwork in order. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, the ears of her stuffed elephant peeking from the zipper. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence her mother had instilled. Nervous but determined, proud of the independence this trip represented. She stepped up to Jennifer's counter and offered a bright smile. "Hi, I'm flying to Los Angeles to see my daddy." The warmth on Jennifer's face vanished. Her voice turned flat. "Can I see your paperwork?" Zara slid the envelope across the counter. Jennifer picked it up gingerly, as though it were suspect. Her eyes scanned the documents with exaggerated slowness. "This says, first class." She held the boarding pass to the light as though checking for watermarks. "Are you sure this is right?" Zara nodded, still polite. "Yes, ma'am. My mommy bought it for me." Jennifer's brow furrowed. She tapped the screen, then tapped it again, making a show of double-checking. "These tickets are very expensive. Sometimes families don't realize they've made a mistake." Several passengers nearby glanced up. They had watched Jennifer shower Emma and Sophie with gifts minutes earlier. None of their paperwork had been questioned. None of their seats had been scrutinized. But here was a young black girl standing patiently, her documents being treated like counterfeits. Jennifer sighed, lifted the phone, and dialed. "I'll need to verify this," she announced loudly enough for people in the waiting area to hear. "We can't just allow errors like this to slip through." Zara's fingers tightened on her elephant. Her shoulders dipped slightly, but she didn't argue. She waited while Jennifer kept her on display, the call nothing more than a performance. After a long pause, Jennifer hung up, the boarding pass still dangling from her hand. She slid it back across the counter, her voice clipped. "Proceed to the gate. No juice boxes, no coloring books, no special announcements over the intercom, just cold dismissal, as though she were an inconvenience rather than a special traveler." Zara adjusted her backpack, lifted her chin, and walked toward the jet bridge. Her steps were steady, even though her chest tightened with confusion. Why had the other girls been celebrated while she was treated like a problem? Passengers exchanged glances. Some whispered about the difference. Others looked away, choosing silence. But Zara did what her mother had told her that morning. She held her head high. And as she boarded Flight 447, clutching her stuffed elephant, she couldn't know that the worst was yet to come, waiting for her just a few rows into first class. The last call for boarding echoed through the jet bridge as Vivian Ashworth strutted down the aisle of Flight 447. Her knockoff handbag swung against her side, her chin held unnaturally high. She scanned the rows with the haughty air of someone convinced first class was her rightful domain. Her eyes swept across the wide leather seats, businessmen flipping open laptops, a woman in pearls adjusting her scarf, the quiet murmur of passengers settling in. Then, 2 rows from the front, she froze. There, nestled into seat 2A, sat a little black girl. Zara Montgomery's backpack was tucked neatly under her seat, her stuffed elephant resting on her lap. She was flipping through a book, her lips moving softly as she read to herself. Vivian's expression curdled. The knockoff smile she had plastered on dissolved into open contempt. She marched forward, stopping at Zara's row. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice dripping condescension. "You're confused. This isn't your section." Zara looked up, startled. "This is my seat, 2A." She held out her boarding pass with both hands. Vivian snatched it, scanning the ticket like a detective searching for proof of forgery. She waved it in the air, turning to the cabin. "First class. This says first class." Her voice rose, sharp enough to slice through the calm of the cabin. "There's clearly been a mistake. Children like this don't belong up here." Heads lifted. Murmurs rippled down the aisle. Passengers who moments ago were adjusting their seatbelts now craned to see the commotion. A man across the aisle frowned, whispering to his companion. Someone else raised their phone discreetly, recording. Zara's voice trembled. "My mommy bought it for me. This is my seat." Vivian scoffed, shaking her head as though the very idea were absurd. "Your family can't afford this. Don't lie to me, young lady. Coach is back there where you belong." She gestured toward the curtain separating first class from economy. Tears began to well in Zara's eyes. She held her elephant tighter, shrinking back into the seat. The flight attendant on duty, Sarah Chen, appeared quickly, her voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" Vivian turned to her as though finally summoning an ally. "Yes, there's a problem. This child is sitting in a seat she doesn't deserve. There must have been some fraud or the system made an error. Fix it." Sarah's brows furrowed. She reached for the boarding passes still clutched in Vivian's hand. After a quick glance, her tone sharpened. "Her ticket is correct. She is assigned seat 2A. You're assigned 4C, 2 rows back. Please take your seat." But Vivian wasn't finished. She raised her voice louder, her words slicing through the cabin like accusations on trial. "That's impossible. Families like hers don't fly first class. She doesn't belong here. And I don't feel safe sitting near her." The cabin fell into shocked silence. Dozens of eyes fixed on her. Phones lifted higher, screens glowing red dots as recordings captured every word. Sarah's professionalism faltered under the weight of Vivian's tone. She glanced at Zara, whose cheeks were wet now, her shoulders shaking as she tried not to cry. Vivian slammed her hand against the headrest. "I said I don't feel safe. Either she moves, or I want the authorities involved. Call security immediately." The words landed like thunder. The atmosphere shifted, tight with tension. Some passengers shook their heads in disbelief, whispering disgust at the blatant prejudice. Others stared at Zara with sympathy, their expressions guilty for staying silent. Zara looked around desperately, searching for a kind face, someone to confirm she wasn't wrong. Her small voice broke through the heavy quiet. "Please, this is my seat." Vivian leaned closer, her face twisted with triumph. "Not for long. I'm not flying with her here. Call the police, now." Gasps erupted. Phones captured every angle. The curtain to the jet bridge stirred as crew members hurried toward the scene, faces taut with alarm. And in that moment, Vivian Ashworth, confident in her prejudice, believed she was in control of the cabin. She had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, her demand for police would unleash consequences she could never contain. The cabin door opened again, but this time it wasn't another passenger stepping aboard. 2 uniformed airport police officers entered, their presence pulling the air tighter like the walls had suddenly closed in. Their radios crackled faintly as they moved down the aisle, eyes already locked on the row where Vivian stood. She wasted no time, waving them over like she'd been waiting for backup. "Officers, here. She's in the wrong seat. I don't feel safe with her here." Every head turned toward 2A. Phones tilted higher. The glow of recording screens dotted the cabin like silent witnesses. The officers stopped in front of Zara. She looked up, clutching her stuffed elephant so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her lips trembled, but she managed to sit straighter, her voice small yet respectful. "This is my seat. 2A. My mommy bought it." One officer crouched, his face unreadable. "Sweetheart, can I see your ticket?" Her hand shook as she passed it over. He studied the stub, glanced at his partner, then back at the girl. Nothing about the pass looked wrong. Still, his voice carried suspicion. "You sure this is yours?" The weight of the question crushed her. At 9 years old, she was being asked to defend her right to sit in a seat that already bore her name. "Yes, sir," she whispered. From across the aisle, Vivian folded her arms, smirking as though victory was near. "See? She can't even answer straight. She doesn't belong here. Families like hers can't afford this. Gasps rippled. Some passengers muttered under their breath, their disgust clear. A man in a business suit leaned forward, shaking his head. This is wrong. She showed you the ticket, but others stayed quiet, their silence heavy. A woman in pearls shifted uneasily, her gaze flicking between the officers and the trembling child, unwilling to speak but unwilling to look away. The second officer addressed Zara again. Where are your parents? They're not here. I'm flying alone. Her voice cracked on the last word. She hugged the elephant tighter, as though it were the only shield she had left. Vivian pounced. Exactly. An unaccompanied minor in first class? That doesn't happen. Somebody messed up. Do your job and remove her before takeoff. The officers exchanged a look, one reaching for his radio. The flight attendant, Sarah Chen, stepped in quickly, her words firm. Her documentation is valid. She's cleared to travel in this seat. But Vivian cut her off. Don't protect her. This is fraud. She doesn't belong in this cabin. The officers hesitated, and in that hesitation lay the truth Maya observed. Innocence, when cloaked in black skin, is questioned more harshly, more quickly, more dangerously. A 9-year-old girl, polite and quiet, was suddenly treated like a suspect. Passengers whispered louder now. Some urged the officers to check the system again. Others pressed record with steadier hands, determined to capture every second. But still, no one stood up to stop it outright. Zara's eyes shimmered. She tried to steady her voice. Please, sir. My mommy said this is my seat, she promised. The crouched officer shifted uncomfortably, the child's words striking him in a place his training couldn't dismiss. Still, Vivian's voice thundered over the moment. I demand you remove her. I will not fly if she stays here. I don't feel safe. Call your supervisor now. The demand cracked the air, a performance fueled by prejudice disguised as safety. And for a moment, it seemed the officers might give in. But hundreds of miles away, in a glass-walled conference room in Chicago, Victoria Montgomery's phone buzzed against the polished oak table. She was mid-sentence, presenting projections to investors, her tone steady and assured. She glanced at the screen and froze. The message was blunt, urgent, impossible to ignore. Her daughter was in trouble. Victoria excused herself from the meeting, her expression unreadable. She knew the world could be cruel. But not like this. Not to her child, not in front of dozens of witnesses. And as she pressed the phone to her ear, her voice low and controlled, a storm gathered. Because Vivian Ashworth had just set her sights on the wrong little girl. Victoria Montgomery strode out of the conference room, heels striking the polished floor like a metronome of control. Behind her, investors whispered, sensing something unusual had broken her otherwise flawless composure. She didn't explain. Her only focus was the phone pressed to her ear, the words she'd just read replaying like a siren in her head. Your daughter is being questioned by airport police. She moved swiftly down the hallway to a quiet alcove and dialed a number only a handful of people in the world possessed. The airline's executive emergency hotline. A voice answered immediately. Montgomery Aviation Command Line, this is Director Patel. Victoria's tone was calm, but her fury threaded through every syllable. This is Victoria Montgomery. My daughter is being harassed by your crew and airport security aboard Flight 447. She is seated in 2A. You will halt this mistreatment now. There was silence on the line, followed by a startled cough. Mrs. Montgomery. CEO Montgomery, she corrected, her voice ironclad. This is my airline, my aircraft, my passengers, and one of those passengers is a 9-year-old child who happens to be my daughter. Officers are on board treating her like a criminal because a prejudiced woman pointed at her and decided she didn't belong. That ends this second. The director's voice quavered. Understood, ma'am. You'll reroute instructions directly to the captain. I expect compliance. I will be at the airport within 20 minutes. And Patel? Her voice dipped lower. If even one more tear falls from my daughter's eyes because of negligence or cowardice, I will not only dismiss the crew, I will demand resignations from every executive connected to this failure. Do you understand me? Yes, CEO Montgomery. Immediate action. She ended the call without another word, her hand trembling slightly, though her face never betrayed it. This wasn't just about authority. This was about a mother's fury cloaked in corporate power, sharpened by the knowledge that her child was facing the very ugliness she'd tried to shield her from. Back on Flight 447, the officers still loomed over Zara. hesitation in their posture. Vivian Ashworth stood tall in the aisle, smugness radiating from her like perfume. She believed she had won, that her loud insistence would override reason, that her demand for safety would eclipse a child's right to exist in a seat her family had paid for. Then the interphone beside the galley buzzed. Sarah Chen, the lead flight attendant, answered. She listened for only a few seconds before her eyes widened. She straightened, her tone snapping with new authority. Officers, step back. The passenger in 2A is to remain undisturbed. That is an executive directive. Confusion flickered across their faces. Executive directive? One repeated. Sarah nodded firmly. Direct from corporate. This child is exactly where she belongs. The officers exchanged a look. They weren't used to being pulled back once called, but the command in Sarah's voice and the urgency from the line still open in her hand made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Passengers stirred, whispering again. Phones caught the shift, the way the officers hesitated, then reluctantly stepped back from Zara's seat. Vivian scoffed. What is this? You can't be serious. She doesn't belong here. You're letting a mistake slide because you're afraid of being called racist. This is ridiculous. Sarah turned to her, voice steady but sharper than before. Ma'am, your accusations are unfounded. Please take your assigned seat in 4C or you will be removed. The smugness on Vivian's face only deepened, as if the confrontation had become a game she was sure she could still win. She flicked her hair over her shoulder, lips curling. You'll see. People like her don't belong in these spaces, and I don't care who's on the phone, I know I'm right. But around her the tide was shifting. The whispers grew louder, the disapproval clearer. Vivian didn't notice, or maybe she refused to. She stood planted in the aisle, convinced her prejudice was principle, her entitlement unshakable. What she didn't realize was that her stage had changed. This was no longer her performance, it was evidence. Every word, every sneer, every baseless claim was being captured by dozens of phones. And now, every crew member knew whose child she had chosen to target. The woman had demanded police to enforce her bias. What she had summoned instead was a mother whose power stretched across every wing and engine of the airline she thought she controlled. But still Vivian smirked, folding her arms as if her certainty could outlast truth itself. She had no idea that the ground beneath her was about to collapse. The aisle of Flight 447 buzzed with tension. Passengers who had been silent observers began shifting in their seats, holding up their phones higher, showing screens glowing with video evidence. One by one, the quiet became a chorus of murmurs, then firm voices cutting through the air. She's lying, a man in business attire said from 3D, his phone raised. I've been recording since the start. The child never caused trouble. The only disruption came from that woman. A young mother in 1C turned her screen toward the officers. Look for yourselves, she accused this little girl of fraud the moment she saw her skin color. The officers glanced at the recordings, their expressions tightening. The narrative Vivian had spun so confidently was dissolving under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Vivian's smirk faltered for the first time. She snapped her fingers toward the phones. Those videos don't prove anything. People edit things all the time. I'm telling you, this is a mistake. But the tide had shifted. A passenger 3 rows back stood and spoke firmly. No editing here. We all heard it. You said she didn't belong because of families like hers. He shook his head, shameful. The murmurs grew louder, echoing like a verdict. Passengers whispered words Vivian could no longer ignore. Racist, cruel, disgraceful. Officer Ramirez, the one who had knelt to question Zara, now turned his full attention on Vivian. Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass again? She thrust it forward, her tone shrill. Of course, seat 4C, that's what I've been saying. The officer raised a brow. Then why were you standing over 2A harassing a minor who clearly had the correct assignment? Vivian's face flushed crimson. She stammered. Because she doesn't belong here. It's obvious. Obvious to who? Interrupted the businessman in 3D. Obvious to you because of the color of her skin? Gasps rippled across the cabin. Vivian recoiled, her lips trembling, but her arrogance kept her standing tall. Don't twist my words. I was only protecting myself. I said I didn't feel safe. The officer's expression hardened. Safety requires evidence of a threat. This child posed none. He gestured toward Zara, still curled into her seat, clutching her elephant. You created this situation. For the first time, Vivian's voice cracked. You don't understand. People like her. They don't usually. She trailed off, realizing too late how damning her words sounded with every camera aimed at her. Sarah Chen, the lead flight attendant, stepped forward now. She crouched to Zara's level, her voice clear enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Miss Montgomery, on behalf of this crew, I want to apologize. You are our valued passenger, and you are exactly where you're supposed to be." The words rang like a balm in the air. Zara sniffled, nodding faintly, gripping her elephant tighter. Passengers offered her warm smiles, some murmuring encouragement. For a moment, the hostility shifted into solidarity. Vivian's jaw dropped. "Apologize to her? You should be apologizing to me. I was the one raising concerns. I was the one who—" "You were the one who humiliated a child," Sarah cut in, her patience gone. "And you were the one who disrupted this cabin with unfounded accusations. That's what everyone here has witnessed." Phones caught every second, Vivian's flushed face, her sputtering protests, her refusal to admit fault. The officers exchanged a look. Ramirez spoke flatly. "Ma'am, if you don't take your assigned seat immediately, we will escort you off this plane." Gasps and murmurs swirled again, but this time they were directed at Vivian, not Zara. The balance of power had flipped. The woman who had stood in the aisle so confident, so sure of her superiority, now looked cornered, her arrogance exposed as cruelty. Vivian scanned the rows, searching for a sympathetic face. None came. All she saw were raised phones, firm eyes, and passengers ready to hold her accountable. The interphone buzzed again. Sarah answered, then turned with a look that sealed the moment. "Headquarters has been informed. Effective immediately, this passenger is blacklisted from all future flights." A collective murmur swept through the cabin. Some passengers nodded in approval, others whispered in disbelief. Vivian's mouth fell open. "Blacklisted? You can't do that. I've flown this airline for years." But her protests fell flat. The cameras were still rolling, the evidence already undeniable. And from corporate headquarters to the cabin of Flight 447, the message was the same. Her reign of arrogance had ended. Vivian's knees wobbled as she sank into seat 4C, her smugness now stripped away, leaving only desperation. What she didn't yet realize was that this was just the beginning of her unraveling. The humiliation was only starting. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a short delay. Airport security will be assisting with a passenger matter." The words were polite, but everyone knew what they meant. Two officers stepped back into the aisle, this time turning not toward the child in 2A, but toward the woman in 4C. "Ma'am," Officer Ramirez said, his voice clipped, "you're coming with us." Vivian's eyes widened. "What? No. She's the one in the wrong seat, not me." The murmurs of passengers swelled again, louder than before. Phones hovered like spotlights, capturing every second. "You've disrupted this flight, harassed a minor, and ignored repeated instructions," Ramirez continued. "You will not be continuing this journey." Vivian clutched the armrests of her seat like they were lifelines. "You can't do this to me. I paid for first class. I belong here." But the officers didn't flinch. One reached for her bag in the overhead compartment while the other gestured firmly. "Stand up, ma'am. Now." Her face twisted with fury, her cheeks blotched crimson. "This is an outrage. You're throwing me off for telling the truth. She doesn't belong here, and you all know it." The cabin erupted. Not with agreement, but with disgust. A passenger in 3D shook his head. "We all saw what happened. Enough." Another added, "You should be ashamed." The humiliation washed over her like fire. Finally, under the officer's grip, Vivian stood. Her knockoff handbag dangled from her arm, her heels clicking angrily as she was led down the aisle. Every phone recorded her exit. Every eye watched her downfall. The cabin door closed behind her with a thud that felt like justice. For the first time since boarding, Zara exhaled. She wiped her cheeks, shoulders still tense, but she did as her mother had taught her. She lifted her chin. Dignity, even in pain. She hugged her elephant tightly and settled back into her seat. Sarah Chen knelt beside her, voice gentle now. "You're safe, sweetheart, and you are exactly where you're supposed to be." Zara nodded faintly, her eyes still wet but her spirit unbroken. Around her, passengers offered soft smiles, quiet words of encouragement. The hostility had passed. What remained was respect for a child who had endured far more than any traveler should. Meanwhile, across the airport, a black car pulled up to the private entrance. The rear door opened, and Victoria Montgomery stepped out, her presence commanding without effort. Word had reached her before she arrived, but nothing compared to seeing her daughter waiting just beyond security. Zara ran into her mother's arms, the stuffed elephant bouncing against her chest. Victoria lifted her, pressing her close, whispering fiercely, "You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing." Tears slipped down Zara's cheeks as she nodded. "I know, Mommy. I stayed strong." Victoria set her down, then turned to face the cluster of crew members and a few lingering passengers who had remained near the gate. Her voice carried the calm authority of a woman used to boardrooms, but now sharpened by a mother's fury. "This should never have happened," she said, her tone echoing against the terminal walls. "My daughter was targeted not because of a seat error, but because of the color of her skin. That is unacceptable in any circumstance, especially on an airline that bears my name." The crew lowered their eyes, shame etched on their faces. Passengers nearby nodded, murmuring in agreement. "Let this be clear," Victoria continued, her gaze sweeping the group. "Respect is not a privilege. It is a requirement. Prejudice has no place in these cabins or in this world." By the time mother and daughter left the terminal, the first videos had already gone viral. Clips of Vivian's outbursts flooded social media. Her shrill demands, her claims of not feeling safe, her words about families like hers. Within hours, hashtags spread across platforms. News outlets replayed the footage, commentators dissecting the arrogance and cruelty on display. The public's judgment was swift and merciless. Vivian Ashworth, once clinging to the illusion of success, found herself blacklisted from flights, her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Calls went unanswered. Her scheduled meeting in Los Angeles was canceled before she even reached the city. And before the day was done, she received the final blow. Termination from her already precarious job, her credibility scorched in the fire she had lit herself. The woman who had tried to strip a child of her dignity had lost her own in front of the world. The story of Flight 447 did not end when Vivian Ashworth was escorted down the jet bridge, heels clicking like punctuation marks of shame. For the passengers who remained, for the crew who had watched, and for the millions who would later scroll through the viral footage, it became something larger, a reminder of how prejudice disguises itself in everyday spaces. Racism does not always announce itself with slurs shouted in the street. It doesn't need to hide in alleys or shadowed corners. It often shows up in the places that claim refinement, in boardrooms, at polished counters, in first-class cabins where the price of a ticket becomes a false justification for exclusion. That day, a child became its target. A 9-year-old, carrying nothing more than a stuffed elephant and the excitement of independence, was nearly criminalized because a woman decided her skin color invalidated her boarding pass. Innocence was not enough to protect her. Courtesy was not enough to protect her. Even truth, her seat clearly marked as 2A, was questioned until power intervened. But what collapsed in that cabin was not Zara Montgomery's dignity. It was Vivian's arrogance. A prejudice she thought untouchable was burned under the scrutiny of a dozen camera lenses and the collective outrage of people tired of seeing injustice disguised as concern. The lesson reverberates. When bias is dragged into the light, it crumbles. The louder Vivian shouted, the more obvious her hatred became. The more she insisted on safety, the clearer it was that she was the only threat disrupting that flight. Passengers will forget the numbers on their boarding passes. They will forget the drink orders and the in-flight movies. But they will not forget the sight of a grown woman trying to strip a child of her dignity, and failing. And the world watching through their phones will not forget either. In less than a day, Vivian's name became shorthand for disgrace. She wanted attention. She got it, just not the kind she craved. Her career, her reputation, her fragile mask of superiority, gone. There's a poetry to the reversal. She believed first class would protect her, that wealth, or at least the appearance of it, would keep her untouchable. But entitlement cannot withstand accountability, and hatred cannot withstand truth. Vivian thought she called the cops on a child. What she summoned was her own downfall. And yet the story is not hers to define. The true power lies in Zara's resilience, in her trembling hands holding out a ticket she had every right to own, in her voice, quiet but steady, insisting, "This is my seat." That is the legacy of Flight 447, not a woman's shame, but a child's courage. So let me leave you with this. What would you have done in Zara's place? Would you have sat tall, holding your ground, even as authority loomed over you? Would you have spoken up if you were a passenger watching? Drop your thoughts below, and let us know by commenting your country flag. We want to see where in the world you're joining this conversation from. And if you believe stories like this must be told, if you believe dignity is priceless and silence is never an option, subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. Together, we keep these truths alive, not just for views, but for justice, because prejudice shrinks when confronted, and dignity, once defended, never fades.